Three men rode out of Sweetwater Valley on the morning of April 14, 1878. Only their horses came back. The woman who would solve that mystery hadn't even arrived yet. She was still 6 days away, riding a stagecoach across prairie that stretched like an ocean. She carried nothing but a letter and a wedding band for a man she'd never met. His name was Jacob Miller, and by the time Elalina Sutton reached Wyoming, he was already in the ground. But here's what nobody expected. She stayed anyway. Now I know what you're thinking. Why would a Boston schoolteacher stay in Wyoming after her intended husband was murdered? Why not take the next stage back east and forget this whole terrible business? Well, that's what most folks would have done. But Elalina Sutton wasn't most folks. Let me show you who she became. The blizzard hit Sweetwater Ranch 3 months after Elalina arrived. It came down from the mountains like the wrath of God. Snow so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Wind that cut through wool like it was cotton. Temperature that made your breath freeze before it left your lungs. Elalina stumbled through the whiteout toward the barn. Her feet were numb in her boots. Her face burned with cold. Ice had formed on her eyelashes, making it hard to blink. She had to reach the cattle, had to get them into the windbreak before they froze standing up. Behind her, the cabin roof groaned under the weight of snow. She'd spent 2 hours inside trying to shore it up with spare planks, but it was giving way. She could hear the timbers cracking even over the howl of the wind. If the roof came down, everything she owned would be buried. Everything Jacob had built would be lost. She couldn't let that happen. The barn door fought her when she tried to pull it open. Snow had drifted against it 3 feet high and packed hard as stone. She dug with her hands. The cold bit through her gloves. Her fingers screamed with pain. Finally, the door gave way. Inside, the darkness was absolute. The smell hit her first. Horse hay manure. And something else. Something wrong. "Rusty!" she called out. Her voice sounded strange in the confined space, muffled by snow and fear. No answering whinny, no sound of hooves shifting in the straw. She fumbled for the lantern that hung by the door. Found it. Struck a match with shaking hands. The flame caught. Yellow light pushed back the darkness. And there in the corner stall lay Rusty, the horse that had carried her across Wyoming, the horse that Jacob had raised from a colt, the steady chestnut gelding that had never once thrown her even when she rode like a fool those first few weeks. Dead. Frozen in the night, his body already stiff, his eyes open and glazed with ice. Elalina stood there, lantern in hand, and felt something break inside her. Not grief, exactly. She'd cried herself empty over Jacob 3 months ago. This was something else. This was the frontier showing her its teeth, reminding her that out here death came easy, came quick, came for horses and men and foolish Boston women who thought they could survive a Wyoming winter alone. She set the lantern down carefully, checked the other stalls. Empty. The cattle she'd managed to get inside yesterday were gone. The barn door she'd fought to open, they'd broken through it during the night, fled into the storm, scattered to God knew where. If she couldn't find them, they'd freeze. A dozen head of cattle, half of what was left of Jacob's herd, half of what stood between her and starvation come spring. She had to go after them. The wind outside had gotten worse. It drove snow into her face like needles. She could barely keep her eyes open, but she could see tracks, deep gouges in the fresh snow where the cattle had run, heading north, toward the creek. Bad direction. The creek would be frozen over, but not solid. Not yet. Not 3 months into winter. If the cattle tried to cross, if they broke through the ice. She started running. Her lungs burned. Her legs felt like lead. The cold was a living thing now trying to kill her with every breath. She found the first cow 20 yards from the barn, dead, already half buried in snow. The second was another 30 yards, still alive, standing with its head down, too cold to move. She slapped its flank, shouted at it. It didn't budge. She left it, kept going, had to find the others. The tracks led her down the slope toward Sweetwater Creek, and there, through the curtain of falling snow, she saw them. 6 cows huddled together on the bank. One was already on the ice, walking out toward the center where the current ran fastest and the ice was thinnest. "No!" she screamed. But the wind took her voice. The cow took another step. The ice groaned, cracked, and gave way. The animal disappeared into black water with a sound like thunder. Thrashed once, twice. Then the current took it under the ice and it was gone. Elalina stood there on the bank, watching her livelihood drown, watching winter take what it wanted. And then she heard it, a sound that made her blood freeze colder than the wind ever could. Wolves, howling, close, too close. She'd left the rifle back at the cabin. She had nothing, no weapon, no horse, no help coming. The remaining cattle heard the wolves too, started moving, panicked. One slipped on the icy bank and went down. The others scattered. The wolves appeared out of the storm like ghosts, gray shapes moving fast and low, 5 of them, maybe 6, hard to count in the blowing snow. They ignored Elelina, went straight for the downed cow. It was already struggling to rise, hooves slipping on ice breath coming in terrified snorts. The lead wolf reached it first, grabbed its throat. The cow's scream cut off in a gurgle. Elelina should have run, should have left the cattle and gotten back to the cabin while she still could. But something in her snapped, something that had been bending for 3 months under the weight of loss and loneliness and this God-forsaken land that took and took and took. She picked up a rock, heavy, sharp, and she ran at the wolves, screaming like a madwoman, waving her arms, throwing the rock as hard as she could. It hit the lead wolf in the ribs. The animal yelped, turned, fixed her with yellow eyes that held no fear, only calculation. The wolf left the dying cow, started toward her. Time slowed down. Elelina could see individual snowflakes falling between her and the wolf, could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could smell blood on the wind. This was how she would die, not in a comfortable Boston bed surrounded by family, but here, in the snow, alone, torn apart by wolves 1,000 miles from anyone who would mourn her. The wolf gathered itself to spring, and then a gunshot cracked across the valley. The wolf dropped, dead before it hit the ground. The other wolves scattered, disappeared into the storm as fast as they'd come. Elelina spun around. A rider was coming up from the south. Big horse, broad-shouldered man, rifle still raised. William Robertson. He rode up beside her, looked down at her with those calm blue eyes that never seemed surprised by anything the frontier threw at them. "You planning to fist-fight wolves now, Miss Sutton?" he asked. And then the world tilted. The cold she'd been ignoring rushed back in. Her legs buckled. William was off his horse in an instant, caught her before she hit the ground, lifted her like she weighed nothing. "Got you," he said quietly. "I got you." The last thing Elelina saw before she passed out was the dead wolf lying in the snow, its blood already freezing, a dark red stain that the storm would bury by morning, just like it would bury her if she'd been out here alone 5 minutes longer. She woke in the cabin, in her own bed, blankets piled high, a fire roaring in the hearth. William was there, and his mother, Martha Robertson. The older woman was pressing something warm against Elelina's hands. Her face was stern. "Can you feel this?" Martha asked. Elelina nodded. Her hands burned like they were on fire. But that was good. Martha had told her once, pain meant the flesh was still alive. "You damn fool girl," Martha said, not unkindly. "Going out in that storm without even a rifle." "The cattle," Elelina managed. Her throat was raw. "Are they dead or scattered?" William said from his position by the fire. "We'll look for survivors when the storm breaks, if any made it." Elelina closed her eyes. Another loss. How many more could she take before there was nothing left? "Your horse died too," Martha continued, blunt as always. "Froze in the barn last night. And your cabin roof came down about an hour ago. Snow's piled 6 feet deep in your front room." 3 months of work. Gone. Just like that. "Most people would quit after a day like this," Martha said. She was still working on Elelina's hands, rubbing warmth back into frozen fingers. "Pack up what's left and take the stage back to wherever they came from." Elelina opened her eyes, met Martha's gaze. "I can't go back," she said. "Why not?" It was the question everyone had been asking for 3 months. Why stay? What was here worth dying for? Elelina didn't have a good answer. Not one that made sense to people who'd never lost everything, who'd never needed to prove that they could build something from nothing. But William spoke up before she had to answer. "Because she's stubborn," he said. There was the ghost of a smile on his face. "And because she made a promise to a dead man. And because she's trying to prove something to herself." He met her eyes across the room. "Am I close?" Elelena found herself smiling despite everything, despite the pain and the loss and the fear. "Close enough," she said. Martha snorted. "Well then, if you're staying, we've got work to do. That roof won't fix itself, and you'll need a new horse, and we need to find whatever cattle survive before the wolves do." She stood up, brushed off her skirts. "But first you're going to rest, and eat, and tell me how in hell a Boston schoolteacher ended up nearly dying in a Wyoming blizzard." William headed for the door. "I'll start clearing the snow from the cabin and see about temporary repairs on that roof." "William," Elelena called after him. He stopped, turned. "Thank you for saving my life." He nodded once. "That's twice now. Try not to make it 3. And then he was gone, leaving Elelena alone with Martha and a question that had been hanging in the air for 3 months. How did a Boston schoolteacher end up in Wyoming well? I suppose it's time I told you that story. 6 months earlier, the stagecoach rattled across the Wyoming prairie like a wooden box full of rocks. Elelena Sutton sat inside, gripping the edge of her seat to keep from being thrown into her fellow passengers. There were only 2 others. A mining engineer heading to the Dakota Territories, and a whiskey drummer with a sample case that smelled like he'd been drinking his own product. Neither one had spoken to her in 3 days, which suited Elelena just fine. She was tired, bone-tired, the kind of tired that came from 6 weeks of travel. Boston to Chicago by train, Chicago to Omaha, Omaha to Cheyenne, and now Cheyenne to a place called Clearwater Creek that didn't appear on any map she'd seen. Her back ached. Her head throbbed from the constant jostling, and she desperately needed to use a chamber pot. But they wouldn't stop again until nightfall. So she sat and endured, and tried not to think about what she was rushing toward. Marriage to a stranger, a man she'd never met, a man whose face she'd never seen, a man who existed for her only in letters. Neat handwriting, thoughtful words, promises that sounded too good to be true. She pulled out his last letter, read it again even though she'd memorized every word. "My dear Elelena, by the time you read this, you will be only days from Wyoming. I confess I can hardly believe it. After 8 months of correspondence, you are finally coming west. I have prepared the cabin as best I can. Fresh whitewash on the walls, new mattress tick stuffed with straw, wildflowers in a jar on the table, though they will likely be dried by the time you arrive. I know you are nervous. You have said as much in your letters. But let me ease your mind with this promise. Whatever you are running from back east, it dies when you cross the Mississippi. Out here you can become anyone you choose to be. I will help you. We will build it together. I am not looking for a housekeeper or a cook. I am looking for a partner. A woman of intelligence and fortitude who can stand beside me as we build something lasting in this new country. You have shown me in your letters that you are that woman. I believe it with my whole heart. Yours in anticipation, Jacob Miller." Elelena folded the letter carefully, slipped it back into her reticule alongside the simple gold band she'd purchased in Omaha. Jacob had enclosed money for a wedding ring, said she should choose something she liked. But Elelena had spent most of that money on practical things: sturdy boots, warm shawls, a good knife. The ring she'd bought was plain, cheap, but it would do. Out here Jacob had written, "You can become anyone you choose to be." She wanted to believe that. God, how she wanted to believe it, because the woman she'd been in Boston, that woman was gone, buried with her father in Mount Auburn Cemetery, sold off piece by piece to pay his creditors, ground down to nothing by well-meaning relatives who'd made it clear there was no place for a spinster schoolteacher in their homes. She had $50 left to her name, no family, no prospects, and a teaching position that had been filled by someone younger and prettier before she'd even given notice. Jacob Miller's advertisement had appeared in the Boston Courier like an answer to prayer. Rancher in Wyoming Territory seeks educated woman for marriage. Must be hardworking, sensible, and willing to embrace frontier life. Partnership in growing cattle operation offered to right candidate. She'd responded on a whim, a moment of desperation disguised as boldness. She'd expected him to want a photograph, a description of her figure, questions about her cooking and sewing skills. Instead, he'd asked about her education, her thoughts on partnership in marriage, her willingness to learn new skills, her reasons for wanting to leave Boston. She'd answered honestly. perhaps too honestly. Told him about her father's failed business, the creditors, the shame, the loneliness, the suffocating feeling of being a burden to everyone who'd once called her family. Jacob's response had changed everything. Dear Miss Sutton, thank you for your honesty. Let me be equally honest in return. I do not care about your father's business failures. The frontier is full of men and women running from failures back east. What matters is what you do here. I do not care that you are 26 and unmarried. I am 32 and have no wife. We are both starting late. We will start together. I do not care that you have no skills in ranching. I will teach you. In return, I hope you will teach me to read better and manage accounts properly. Partnership, as I said. What I do care about is this. Will you work hard? Will you face difficulties without breaking? Will you build something with me that lasts? If you can answer yes to those questions, I believe we will do well together. That had been 8 months ago. 8 months of letters, of Jacob's careful descriptions of Wyoming, of his dreams for Sweetwater Ranch, of the cabin he was building, the cattle he was raising, the future he was planning, a future that included her. And now here she was, 3 days from Clearwater Creek, 3 days from meeting the man who'd promised her a new life. The stagecoach hit a particularly deep rut. Elalina's head cracked against the wooden frame. She bit back a curse. The drummer laughed. "City folk," he muttered. "Never last out here." Elalina ignored him, closed her eyes, tried to imagine what Jacob looked like. Tall, probably. Ranch work would make him strong. Weathered face from years in the sun. Kind eyes. She hoped for kind eyes. She dozed fitfully as the stage rolled on, dreamed of whitewashed walls and wildflowers, and a man whose face she couldn't quite see. When she woke, the sun was setting. They were pulling into a small settlement, a handful of wooden buildings clustered around a single dirt street. "Clearwater Creek," the driver called down. "End of the line." Elalina's heart jumped into her throat. This was it. She was here. She gathered her things, climbed down from the stage on shaky legs, looked around at the town that would be her new home. It was smaller than Jacob had described, much smaller. A trading post, a saloon, what looked like a hotel, a small church with a crooked steeple. And that was it. The street was empty. No one waiting to greet her. Where was Jacob? "Your trunks, ma'am." The driver was unloading her belongings. 2 worn trunks that held everything she owned in the world. "Thank you," she managed. "Is there? I'm supposed to meet someone." "Jacob Miller, of Sweetwater Ranch." The driver's expression changed. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "You'd best speak with Sheriff Patterson," he said quietly. "His office is right there." He pointed to a small building with a wooden star hanging from its porch. A cold feeling settled in Elalina's stomach. "Is something wrong?" The driver didn't answer, just climbed back onto his perch and flicked the reins. The stage rolled away, leaving Elalina alone in the middle of the street with her trunks and her mounting dread. She made herself walk to the sheriff's office, made herself open the door. A man looked up from his desk. 50s, gray hair, tired eyes that had seen too much. "You must be Miss Sutton," he said. He stood up. "I've been expecting you." The way he said it, the gentleness, the pity. Elalina felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Where is Jacob?" she heard herself ask. Her voice sounded very far away. Sheriff Patterson gestured to a chair. "Please sit down, Miss Sutton. I'm afraid I have some difficult news." She didn't sit. Couldn't. If she sat down, it would make it real. "Tell me." The sheriff sighed, rubbed his face. "There was an incident 3 days ago, about 15 miles east of town. Jacob Miller and 2 other ranchers were bringing cattle to market. They were ambushed." The word hung in the air. Ambushed. "Is he hurt?" she asked, knowing the answer, seeing it in the sheriff's face. "I'm sorry, Miss Sutton. Jacob didn't survive the attack. None of them did." The floor really did tilt then. Elalina grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. Dead. Jacob was dead. The man she'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry. The man whose letters had given her hope. The man who'd promised her a future. Gone. "We found them yesterday," the sheriff continued. "Cavalry patrol came across the bodies. We brought them back. Held a funeral this morning. I'm sorry you missed it. We didn't know when you'd arrive." Elalina couldn't speak, couldn't think. Everything she'd planned, everything she'd hoped for, it had all just ended before it even began. "I understand this is a shock," Patterson said, not unkindly. "The hotel has a room for you, and there's a stage back east next Tuesday. I can arrange passage if—" "Who did it?" Elalina interrupted. Her voice was cold, steady, surprising even herself. "We believe it was the Blackwell gang. Frank Blackwell and his boys have been terrorizing the territory for 2 years. Stage robberies, rustling, now this." "Have you caught them?" "Not yet, but we will." Elalina finally sat down, not because she was weak, but because she needed to think. Jacob was dead, murdered, and she was standing in a town she'd never seen before, with no husband, no home, no money to get back to Boston, and nothing waiting for her there even if she could. "What happens to Sweetwater Ranch?" she asked. The sheriff looked surprised by the question. "Well, Jacob had no family out here that we know of. I suppose the bank will eventually claim it, or one of the bigger ranches might absorb the land." "He sent for me," Elalina said. "We were to be married. Surely that counts for something." Patterson's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Miss Sutton, I understand your situation, but without a marriage certificate or a will naming you, you have no legal claim to the property. No claim, no rights, nothing, just like Boston, where she'd watched her father's business be carved up by creditors, where she'd been nothing, nobody, a burden, not again." "I want to see it," she said. "Ma'am, before I decide anything, I want to see Sweetwater Ranch." The sheriff hesitated. "It's not safe for a woman alone, especially with the Blackwell gang still." "Then escort me," Elalina said. "Tomorrow. I want to see what Jacob built." Patterson studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, Miss Sutton, tomorrow. First light." Elalina stood, gathered what dignity she had left. "Thank you, Sheriff. Now if you could direct me to the hotel." She spent that night in a small room above the trading post. Couldn't sleep, just sat by the window watching stars appear over the Wyoming darkness. Jacob was dead. The future she'd imagined was gone. But something in her refused to just give up, refused to crawl back to Boston with her tail between her legs. She thought about his letters, his promises, his belief that she was strong enough for this life. Maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe she'd fold like wet paper the first time the frontier tested her. But maybe not. She pulled out the wedding band, turned it over in her fingers, watched it catch the moonlight. She'd come west to marry Jacob Miller, to be his partner, to build something that lasted. Well, Jacob was gone, but his ranch was still there, his dream was still there, and Elalina Sutton was still here. Maybe that was enough. The next morning, Sheriff Patterson arrived with 2 horses. Elalina had never ridden astride before. Boston ladies rode side saddle if they rode at all. But she hiked up her skirts, settled into the unfamiliar saddle, and held on tight. They rode east into the rising sun. The landscape unfolded around her like nothing she'd ever seen. Rolling grassland that stretched forever. The distant mountains, the endless sky. It was beautiful, terrifying, vast beyond comprehension. After 2 hours they crested a small rise. Patterson reined in his horse. "There," he said. "Sweetwater Ranch." Elalina looked down into the valley below and felt something catch in her chest. A creek wound through the center of the property. Cottonwood trees lined its banks, green grass, good land, and nestled near the creek a small cabin with a barn and corral beside it. It was exactly as Jacob had described it, every detail, right down to the way the morning sun caught the water and made it sparkle. They rode down, dismounted in front of the cabin. The door was unlocked. Patterson pushed it open, stepped aside to let Elalina enter first. She walked into what should have been her home. One room, a fireplace, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, shelves holding a few books, a bed frame in the corner, and everywhere the evidence of a man preparing for a bride. Fresh whitewash on the walls just like he'd promised. A new mattress tick, and there on the table a jar of dried wildflowers. Elalina's eyes burned. She blinked hard, refused to cry. There was a desk in the corner, She went to it, found Jacob's ledger, opened it to neat columns of figures, cattle counts, expenses, income from sales. The last entry was dated 4 days ago. Purchased white paint for cabin trim. E arrives next week. She traced the words with her finger. E, her. He'd been thinking of her even as he rode to his death. He was doing well, Patterson said from the doorway. Not rich, but making progress. Another few years and this could have been one of the better small spreads in the area. Could have been. Elalina closed the ledger, looked around at the cabin, at the life Jacob had built, the future he'd imagined. In the desk drawer she found a folded paper, pulled it out, unfolded it, an unfinished letter. To her, in Jacob's neat handwriting. My dear Elalina, by the time you read this, you will have arrived at Sweetwater, and we will have begun our life together. There is something I must confess that I have not mentioned in my previous letters. The situation in the territory has grown tense. A man named Emmett Hargrove has been pressuring me to sell the ranch to him. His methods have become increasingly threatening. Last month 2 of my best cattle were shot, dead in the north pasture. The sheriff can prove nothing, but I know it was... The letter ended there, unfinished. Jacob had been afraid, had known he was in danger, and still he'd sent for her, still believed they could build something together. Elalina folded the letter carefully, slipped it into her pocket. I'm staying, she said. Patterson looked up sharply. Miss Sutton, you can't be serious. I'm claiming homestead continuation rights, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. As Jacob Miller's intended bride. You weren't married. You have no legal... The Homestead Act allows a widow to continue her husband's claim. Elalina met his eyes. I was to be Jacob's wife. We had an agreement. His letters prove intent. I'm claiming this land. The land office will never recognize... Then I'll fight them, Elalina said. I'll take it to the territorial commissioner if I have to. But I'm not leaving. Patterson stared at her. She could see him trying to decide if she was brave or crazy. Finally he sighed. Miss Sutton, Elalina, I admire your spirit, but this territory is no place for a woman alone, especially not with threats like Hargrove and the Blackwell gang. Then I'll learn to defend myself, she said simply. Jacob believed I was strong enough for this life. I'm going to prove him right. The sheriff shook his head, but there was a hint of respect in his eyes now. You'll need help, ranch hands, supplies, and a good rifle. I'll manage. You'll die before winter. Maybe, Elalina admitted, but I'd rather die trying than go back east with nothing. Patterson was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. All right, I'll help you file the paperwork. No guarantees it'll be accepted, but I'll try. Thank you. He headed for the door, paused. There's a young man, Daniel Tucker. He worked for Jacob during the busy seasons. I can send word to him if you want. Please. After the sheriff left, Elalina stood alone in the cabin. Her cabin now, maybe. She walked to the window, looked out at Sweetwater Creek, at the land Jacob had loved, at the future he'd promised her. Whatever you're running from back east, it dies when you cross the Mississippi. Out here you can become anyone you choose to be. Well then, she chose to be a rancher, a landowner, a woman who didn't need a husband to build a legacy. She pulled out the wedding band, the one she'd bought in Omaha, slipped it onto her finger, not as Jacob's wife, but as a promise to herself, to him, to the dream they'd almost shared. She would make Sweetwater Ranch thrive, would prove that a Boston schoolteacher could survive the frontier, would build something that lasted, and if Emmett Hargrove or Frank Blackwell tried to stop her, well, she'd cross that bridge when she came to it. Elalina Sutton had come west to find a husband. Instead, she'd found herself, and that, as it turned out, was exactly what she needed. 2 weeks passed, 2 weeks of Elalina learning what frontier life really meant, what it cost, what it demanded. The first lesson was loneliness. She'd been alone before, after her mother died, after her father's business failed, after the creditors took everything. But that had been Boston loneliness, city loneliness, the kind where you're surrounded by people who don't see you. This was different. This was silence so complete it rang in your ears, darkness so absolute you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, space so vast it made you feel like a speck of dust on an endless prairie. The cabin creaked at night, wind moaned around the corners, coyotes yipped in the distance, and Elalina lay awake listening to sounds she didn't understand jumping at every noise. She kept Jacob's rifle by the bed, loaded, even though she didn't know how to shoot it. The second lesson was work. Ranch work wasn't like teaching school, wasn't like keeping house in Boston. It was relentless, brutal, never-ending. Water to haul from the creek, firewood to chop and stack, animals to feed, fences to check, a garden to tend. And that was just to survive. That didn't count the actual ranching, the cattle that needed managing, the land that needed knowing. Her hands blistered, then bled, then calloused over. Her back ached every morning, her shoulders screamed, her legs trembled when she climbed into bed at night. But she didn't quit. The third lesson was humility. Elalina had thought she was capable, competent. She'd managed her father's household, taught 30 students at once, navigated Boston society. Out here she was useless. She couldn't ride properly, couldn't rope a calf, couldn't tell a sick cow from a healthy one, couldn't start a fire in the wind, couldn't even saddle a horse without help. Sheriff Patterson had arranged for her to borrow a mare from the Robertson Ranch, a gentle old thing named Daisy. Elalina had tried to ride her to check the northern fence line. She'd fallen off 3 times in the first mile. The third time she'd landed hard on her tailbone, sat there in the dirt close to tears watching Daisy amble away. That's when Martha Robertson appeared. The older woman rode up on a big bay gelding, looked down at Elalina sitting in the dust, didn't say a word, just waited. Elalina stood up, brushed herself off, walked over to Daisy, grabbed the reins, put her foot in the stirrup, hauled herself back into the saddle. Only then did Martha speak. "You'll do," was all she said. Then she'd turned her horse and ridden away, leaving Elalina to find her own way home. But the next morning Martha came back, brought her son William, a quiet young man with his mother's steady eyes and his late father's broad shoulders. "We're gathering Jacob's cattle today," Martha announced. "You're coming." It wasn't a question. Elalina had learned enough in 2 weeks to know that out here you didn't turn down help, couldn't afford to. Pride was a luxury for people who didn't need their neighbors. So she saddled Daisy, fell into line behind Martha and William, and tried not to be dead weight. They rode east into the spring morning. The sun was warm on Elalina's face. The grass was green and thick. Wildflowers dotted the prairie in splashes of yellow and purple. It was beautiful, painfully beautiful, the kind of beauty that made her understand why Jacob had loved this land, why he'd been willing to die for it. They found the first group of cattle near the creek, about 20 head, grazing peacefully. They bore Jacob's brand, the SM mark for Sweetwater Miller. "These need to be moved to the south pasture," Martha said. "Better grass there, and closer to the ranch house where you can keep an eye on them." "How do we move them?" Elalina asked. William smiled slightly. Carefully. He and his mother spread out, started circling the cattle, moving slow, easy, letting the animals bunch up naturally. Elalina tried to copy them, but Daisy was old and slow, and Elalina had no idea what she was doing. She ended up scattering 3 cows that William had to chase down. "Just stay behind them," he called. "Don't try to do anything fancy." So she stayed behind, tried to be useful, mostly succeeded in staying out of the way. They'd moved about half the herd when a young man rode up, 18 or 19, freckled face, red hair poking out from under his hat. "Daniel Tucker," he introduced himself, tipped his hat to Elalina. "Sheriff said you might need a hand, Miss Sutton." This was Jacob's seasonal ranch hand, the boy he'd trusted, the one who'd worked Sweetwater for 3 years. Daniel's eyes were sad when he looked at the cattle, at the land, like he was seeing a ghost everywhere he turned. "I'm sorry about Mr. Miller," he said quietly. "He was a good man, taught me a lot." "Thank you," Elalina managed. Daniel fell in beside William. The 2 young men worked well together. Easy coordination, the kind that came from years of doing the same work. Elalina watched them, tried to learn, saw how they anticipated the cattle's movements, how they used their horses like extensions of themselves, how they made it look easy when she knew it wasn't. By midday they'd gathered most of the herd, moved them toward the south pasture. The cattle were tired, moving slow, Everything seemed to be going well. That's when the wolves appeared. Elalina saw them first, gray shapes moving through the tall grass on the eastern ridge. 5 of them, maybe 6. "Wolves," she said, tried to keep her voice calm. Failed. Martha's head snapped around. She saw them too. Her jaw tightened. "Daniel, William, we need to move these cattle, now." But the cattle had already sensed the danger. They were getting nervous, starting to shift and mill. One of the calves bawled, high and frightened, and the wolves attacked. They came in fast, low to the ground, aiming for the calf that had made noise, separating it from its mother. The herd panicked, started to scatter. William and Daniel rode hard to keep them together, but it was chaos. Cattle running in every direction, horses wheeling, dust rising. The lead wolf reached the calf, lunged for its throat. Daniel pulled his rifle from the saddle scabbard. Aimed. Fired. Missed. The wolf dodged. Circled. Came at the calf from another angle. Daniel fired again. This time he hit it. The wolf yelped, tumbled, lay still. But the other wolves didn't retreat. They pressed the attack. One grabbed the calf's hind leg, dragged it down. The calf screamed, a sound Elalina would hear in her nightmares for weeks. High and terrified and cut short when another wolf got its throat. Martha was shooting now too. Dropped one wolf, then another. But there were too many, and the cattle were scattering. If they lost the herd now, it would take days to gather them again. Days Elalina couldn't afford. William's horse went down, stepped in a prairie dog hole and fell hard. William rolled clear, came up with his rifle, but he was on foot now, vulnerable. A wolf saw him, turned away from the dying calf, started toward him. Elalina didn't think, just acted. She kicked Daisy into a gallop, rode straight at the wolf, screaming, waving her arms, making herself big and loud and terrifying. The wolf hesitated, confused by this crazy woman charging it. That hesitation saved William's life. He got his rifle up, aimed, fired. The wolf dropped. But Daisy, the gentle old mare, had finally had enough. She reared, threw Elalina from the saddle, bolted. Elalina hit the ground hard. All the air left her lungs. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't move. And there, 10 feet away, was another wolf. It had blood on its muzzle, yellow eyes, teeth bared. It started toward her. Elalina scrambled backward, grabbed for anything, found a rock, heavy, sharp. She threw it. Hit the wolf in the face. It yelped, shook its head, kept coming. She was going to die, right here, right now, torn apart by wolves while trying to save cattle she barely knew how to manage. The wolf gathered itself to spring. A gunshot cracked. The wolf dropped, dead before it hit the ground. Elalina looked up. Daniel was there, still mounted, rifle smoking. "You all right, Miss Sutton?" he asked. She nodded, couldn't speak. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Daniel swung down from his horse, offered her a hand, pulled her to her feet. "That was either real brave or real stupid," he said. There was a hint of a smile on his freckled face. Charging a wolf on an old mare. "Probably stupid," Elalina managed. "Well, Mr. Miller always said you don't know what you're made of until something tries to kill you." Martha rode up, surveyed the scene. 5 dead wolves, 1 dead calf. William's horse, limping but alive. Cattle scattered across half a mile. "Could have been worse," she said, which was high praise coming from Martha Robertson. William caught Daisy, led her back. "You didn't freeze," he said to Elalina. "That's the important thing. Out here freezing gets you killed. You acted. That's the difference." Elalina looked at the dead wolves, at the blood on the grass, at her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. She'd almost died, for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. Once in the blizzard she'd imagined, once nearly falling through creek ice, and now this. How many more times could she cheat death before her luck ran out? "Come on," Martha said. "We need to gather these cattle before dark, and you need to learn to shoot properly. Can't rely on us saving you every time." They spent the rest of the day rounding up the scattered herd. By sunset they had most of them, moved them to the south pasture, set them to grazing on good grass. Elalina's whole body ached. She had bruises from the fall, cuts on her hands from grabbing at rocks and brush, dirt under her fingernails, blood on her skirt from kneeling beside the dead calf. She'd never been so tired in her life. But when they rode back to Sweetwater as the sun set, Something had changed. She could feel it. See it in the way Martha looked at her, the way Daniel tipped his hat, the way William rode beside her instead of ahead. She'd proven something today. Not that she was skilled, she wasn't. Not that she was experienced, she wasn't that either. But she'd proven she wouldn't quit, wouldn't run, wouldn't freeze when death came calling. Out here, maybe that was enough. That night Daniel showed her how to load the rifle, how to hold it, how to aim. "We'll practice tomorrow," he said. "Set up some bottles. Get you comfortable with it." "Thank you, Daniel." He nodded, started to leave, paused. "Miss Sutton, Mr. Miller used to say something, when things got hard. He'd say this land tests everyone, but it rewards those who stay." Daniel looked out at the darkness beyond the cabin. "I think he'd be proud that you stayed." After he left, Elalina sat at Jacob's desk, opened his ledger, made her first entry in her own hand. May 1st, 1878. Gathered cattle with Robertson family and D. Tucker. Lost one calf to wolves. Learned that bravery and stupidity look the same from the outside. She smiled at that. Closed the ledger. Tomorrow she'd learn to shoot. The day after she'd ride fence lines. The day after that, whatever needed doing. One day at a time, one lesson at a time, until she wasn't a Boston schoolteacher playing at ranching anymore. Until she was something else entirely. The branding came 2 weeks later. Martha had explained it matter-of-factly. Spring calves needed to be branded before they grew much bigger, marked with the ranch's symbol, proof of ownership that would last their whole lives. "Every ranch has a brand," she'd said. "Registered with the territorial office. Jacob's was S.M. Sweetwater Miller. That brand is your legal claim to those cattle. Without it, anyone could say they're theirs." So branding it would be. Martha and William arrived at dawn, brought 2 ranch hands from their spread. Daniel showed up with firewood and the branding irons he'd retrieved from the north pasture shed. "Haven't been used since last spring," he said, "when Mr. Miller was still—" He trailed off. "When Jacob was still alive, before everything changed." They built the fire in the clearing near the corral. Hot, hotter than any fire Elalina had ever seen. The irons went into the coals, had to heat until they glowed orange. The work began. William and Daniel roped the calves one by one. Young cattle 3 to 4 months old, strong enough to fight. The men wrestled them to the ground, held them down. Martha worked the iron, pressed it to each calf's flank. The smell of burning hair and hide filled the air. The calves bawled in pain and fear. Elalina watched, tried not to flinch. This was necessary, she told herself. Protection. Every branded calf was a calf that couldn't be stolen, couldn't be claimed by someone else, but it was hard to watch. "You want to try one?" Martha asked after the 10th calf. Elalina shook her head. "I don't think I'm ready." "Probably not," Martha agreed. "But you need to understand it. This is part of ranching, the hard part, the part that hurts." So Elalina stood close, watched Martha work, saw the skill in it, the quick, sure placement of the iron, just long enough to burn the mark deep. Not so long it damaged the hide. They'd branded 15 calves when riders appeared on the eastern road. 3 men, well-dressed, well-mounted, moving with the confidence of people who owned everything they saw. Daniel saw them first, straightened. His hand drifted toward the rifle leaning against the fence. "Easy," William said quietly. "Let's see what they want." The riders came into the yard. The one in the center was older, 50s maybe, silver hair, expensive hat, cold pale eyes that assessed everything with the calculation of a man who knew the price of things but not their value. He looked at Elalina, at the branding fire, at the SM mark on the calves. "So," he said, "you're Jacob Miller's mail-order bride." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, dismissive, like she was a curiosity, a strange bird that had flown too far from home. Elalina straightened, met his eyes. "I'm Elalina Sutton, and you are—" "Emmett Hargrove." He said it like she should know the name, should be impressed. "I own the Double Bar Ranch, east of here, about 3,000 acres. 3,000. Jacob's homestead was 640. This man owned nearly 5 times as much land. "I knew Jacob," Hargrove continued. "Good man, hard-working, Not very practical, perhaps, but hard-working. He swung down from his horse, handed the reins to one of his men, walked toward the fire like he owned it. "I made Jacob an offer for this land back in January," he said. "Fair price, more than fair, actually. He turned me down." Hargrove looked around at Sweetwater, at the modest cabin, the small barn, the narrow creek. "I understand why he wanted to keep it. Man gets attached to his first spread, but circumstances have changed." He turned back to Elalina. "I'm prepared to offer you $3,000 for this property, Miss Sutton, enough to see you comfortably back to Boston, or wherever you might wish to go." $3,000. More money than Elalina had ever seen in one place. More than her father had left when he died. More than she could make teaching in 5 years. It would be easy. Take the money, leave, start over somewhere else, somewhere safer, somewhere that didn't have wolves and blizzards and men who looked at her like she was trespassing. But something in Hargrove's manner bothered her. The way he assumed she'd sell. The way he talked about Jacob in the past tense with no real grief, just mild annoyance that a business transaction hadn't gone his way. And there was something else, something familiar about him that she couldn't quite place. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Hargrove," she said carefully. "But Sweetwater Ranch is not for sale." His eyebrows rose. "Not for sale. I see." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Sutton, with all due respect, running a cattle operation is not work for a woman alone. It's dangerous, difficult, especially with the current troubles in the territory." "What troubles?" Elalina asked. "Rustlers. The Blackwell gang. They're getting bolder. Jacob learned that the hard way." The way he said it. Casual. Matter of fact. Like Jacob's death was just an unfortunate business setback. Martha stepped forward. "Emmett, the lady said no. That's the end of it." Hargrove's smile cooled. "Martha Robertson, still scraping by on that hardscrabble patch north of here, I see. How is William managing without his father?" "We manage fine," William said. His voice was level, but his hand rested near his gun belt now. Hargrove looked from Martha to William to Daniel, took in the unified front, the quiet hostility. "I'm just trying to help," he said, spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "Prevent another tragedy. The frontier is no place for city women who don't know what they're getting into." "I appreciate your concern," Elalina said, though she didn't. "But I intend to maintain Sweetwater Ranch." "Do you even have legal claim to it?" Hargrove asked. "You weren't married to Jacob. As far as the land office is concerned, you're a stranger with no rights here." "That's being settled," Elalina said. Hoped it was true. Sheriff Patterson had filed her continuation claim 2 weeks ago. She hadn't heard back yet. Hargrove studied her, really looked at her for the first time, and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Confusion. "Have we met before, Miss Sutton?" he asked. "You seem familiar somehow." A chill ran down Elalina's spine. "I don't believe so. I'm from Boston. I've never been west before." "Boston." He rolled the word around like he was tasting it. "Interesting. What part of Boston?" Beacon Hill, Elalina lied. She'd actually lived in the cheaper neighborhood near the river, but something told her not to give this man the truth. Hargrove seemed to lose interest, turned toward his horse. "Well, my offer stands for 30 days, Miss Sutton. After that, I'm afraid the price will drop considerably. Market forces, you understand." He swung into the saddle with the ease of a man who'd been riding his whole life. "Accidents happen out here," he said, almost as an afterthought. "Jacob learned that. It would be a shame if you learned it the same way." Then he turned his horse. His men followed. They rode east toward the double bar. Nobody spoke until they were out of sight. "That was a threat," Daniel said quietly. "Yes," Martha agreed. "It was." "Who is he?" Elalina asked. "Really," William answered. "Biggest rancher in the county, maybe the territory. Started with nothing 20 years ago. Now he owns half the valley. Some say through hard work, some say through sharp practices." "My husband refused to sell to him," Martha said. "Twice. Thomas died 6 months later. Doctor said pneumonia." She paused. "I've always wondered." The implication hung in the air. Had Martha's husband really died of illness? Or had Hargrove arranged something? "You need to be careful," William said to Elalina. "Hargrove doesn't make idle threats. If he wants this land, he'll find a way to get it." "Then I'll have to make sure he doesn't," Evelina said. Sounded braver than she felt. They finished the branding in silence. 27 calves marked with the SM brand. 27 pieces of legal proof that Sweetwater Ranch existed, that Evelina Sutton had a claim here. After everyone left, Evelina searched the barn for supplies, found the tack room Jacob had mentioned in one of his letters, saddle repair tools, extra rope, and there, hanging on a hook in the back, a gun belt. She lifted it down. Heavy leather, well worn, and in the holster a revolver. She pulled it out carefully, checked the cylinder like Daniel had taught her, loaded. There was something dark on the grip. She held it up to the lantern light. Dried blood. Evelina's breath caught. This was Jacob's gun, the one he'd been carrying when he died. Sheriff Patterson must have returned it with his other belongings. But if Jacob had been wearing this gun, why hadn't he used it? Why hadn't he defended himself? Daniel's voice came from the doorway. "Mr. Miller was wearing that the day he died. Sheriff said he never drew it." "Why not?" Evelina asked. Daniel shrugged, but his eyes were troubled. "Maybe he didn't see the attack coming, or maybe—" He trailed off. "Maybe what?" "Maybe he knew the men who killed him. Maybe he trusted them. Until it was too late." Evelina looked at the blood-stained revolver, at the evidence of violence that had ended Jacob's life. Hargrove had known Jacob, had made him offers for this land, had been refused. And now Jacob was dead, killed in an ambush that Sheriff Patterson blamed on the Blackwell gang. But what if there was more to it? What if Hargrove had hired Blackwell, paid him to eliminate the stubborn rancher who wouldn't sell? It was just a suspicion, no proof. But the thought lodged in Evelina's mind like a burr. She cleaned the blood from the revolver, loaded it fresh, hung the gun belt on a hook beside her bed. If Hargrove came back, she'd be ready. That night, Evelina couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Hargrove's face, the way he'd looked at her, asked if they'd met before. They hadn't. She was sure of it. But something about him nagged at her, something just beyond her memory's reach. She got up, lit the lamp, started going through Jacob's papers more carefully, looking for anything about Hargrove, any mention of him. In a folder of old business correspondence, she found a letter, dated 6 months before Jacob's death. "Mr. Miller, this is my final offer for the Sweetwater property, $500. Take it or face the consequences of your stubbornness. Regards E. Hargrove, $500 for 640 acres of good land with water rights. It was an insult, a lowball offer designed to pressure Jacob into selling cheap." Evelina kept searching, found more letters, all from Hargrove, all threats dressed up as business correspondence. Jacob had kept them all, like he was building a case, evidence of harassment. But he'd never gotten to use it, because he'd died first. Evelina's hands shook as she read the last letter, dated just 2 weeks before the ambush. "Miller, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Men have disappeared in this territory for less stubborn behavior. Think about your pretty bride coming all the way from Boston. Would be a shame if she arrived to find nothing but a burned cabin and dead cattle. Last chance. Sell, or face what comes next." E.H. Evelina felt cold. Hargrove had threatened Jacob 2 weeks before he died, had mentioned her specifically, the bride from Boston. This wasn't coincidence. This was murder, premeditated, planned. And now Hargrove was making the same threats to her. She folded the letters carefully, put them in her reticule. Tomorrow she'd take them to Sheriff Patterson, show him the evidence. But would it be enough? Threatening letters weren't the same as proof of murder, and Hargrove was powerful, connected, the kind of man who could make problems disappear, like he'd made Jacob disappear. Evelina blew out the lamp, lay in the darkness, listened to the night sounds of Wyoming. Somewhere out there Hargrove was planning, scheming, figuring out how to take what he wanted. But Evelina Sutton wasn't Jacob Miller. She wasn't a lone rancher trying to hold out against a powerful neighbor. She was a woman with nothing left to lose, which made her the most dangerous kind of enemy. Let Hargrove come. Let him threaten. Let him try to take Sweetwater. She'd be waiting, and this time when someone drew a gun on her land, she'd be ready to draw back. The frontier tested everyone, Daniel had said, but it rewarded those who stayed. Well, Evelina Sutton was staying. no matter what it cost. 4 weeks passed. 4 weeks of Elalina learning to shoot, learning to ride, learning to read the land and the weather and the 100 small signs that meant the difference between success and failure on the frontier. Daniel came by most mornings, patient as a saint, teaching her how to mend fence, how to doctor sick cattle, how to tell good grass from bad, how to read tracks in the dust. William rode over twice a week, usually with some excuse. A tool to borrow, a question about boundary lines. Once he brought fresh venison from a deer he'd shot, said his mother had more than they could eat. Elalina suspected Martha had sent him on purpose, making sure the city woman wasn't starving, making sure she was still alive. She was grateful for it, all of it, the help, the company, the slow, careful way they were teaching her to survive. But there was something else happening too, something she couldn't quite name. She was changing, becoming someone else. Her hands were rough now, calloused, strong. She could chop wood without blisters, could haul water without her arms shaking, could ride Daisy for hours without feeling like her bones would shatter. She wore trousers most days. Martha had brought them, said they'd belonged to her younger son before he moved to Oregon. They were too big in the waist, too long in the leg. But Elalina had altered them, made them fit. The first time she'd worn them to town, Mrs. Halloway at the Mercantile had stared like Elalina had sprouted horns. But Sheriff Patterson had just nodded. Practical, was all he said. The homestead claim was still pending. The land office was dragging its feet. Patterson said that was normal, said bureaucracy moved slow. But Elalina could see the doubt in his eyes. They didn't think she'd last long enough for it to matter. She was determined to prove them wrong. This particular morning, Elalina was organizing Jacob's papers. She needed to file a formal claim, needed documentation, proof that she had the right to be here. She'd been through most of his correspondence already, but there were still boxes in the back of the closet, old files, business records from before he'd come west. She pulled them out, started sorting, bills of sale for cattle, receipts for supplies, letters from other ranchers, nothing useful. And then at the bottom of the third box she found a folder she'd missed before. Loan documents, from 1875. She almost put it aside. It was old, probably not relevant. But something made her open it. The first page was a standard promissory note. Borrower Sutton Manufacturing Company, Boston, Massachusetts. Amount $12,000. Interest 8% per annum. Elalina's breath stopped. Sutton Manufacturing, her father's company. She turned the page with shaking hands. Lender Hargrove Financial Group, Boston. Her vision blurred. She read it again and again, making sure she wasn't seeing things. Hargrove Financial Group. The same Hargrove. Emmett Hargrove. He'd been in Boston, had loaned money to her father. She flipped through the rest of the documents, saw the history laid out in black and white. The loan issued in 1875. Her father's payments. Regular at first, then sporadic, then stopping altogether. Notices of default. Demands for payment. Threats of legal action. And finally a notice of foreclosure, dated February 1876, signed by Emmett Hargrove himself. The business seized. Assets liquidated. Nothing left. Elalina sat on the floor of the cabin surrounded by papers and felt the world shift beneath her. Hargrove hadn't just known her father. He'd destroyed him. Her father had borrowed money to expand the business, had gotten in over his head when the economy collapsed after the war, had tried to negotiate, to ask for more time, and Hargrove had refused, had taken everything, left the Sutton family with nothing. Her father had died a year later, broken, ashamed, unable to face what he'd lost, and Elalina had been left alone. Adrift, with no money, no family, no future, until she'd answered Jacob Miller's advertisement, until she'd come to Wyoming, until she'd ended up on land that Emmett Hargrove wanted. The same man who'd destroyed her father was now trying to destroy her. But why? Why would Jacob have these papers? Why would he keep her father's loan documents? She searched through the folder again, found a letter, in Jacob's handwriting, addressed to her, never sent. Dear Elalina, if you're reading this, I'm likely dead. I'm sorry. I had hoped to tell you this in person, but circumstances have not cooperated. When you first wrote to me, you mentioned your father's business failing, creditors taking everything. You didn't name the creditor, but you mentioned Boston, and you mentioned the date, 1876. I made inquiries, called in some favors with men I know back east, found out it was Hargrove who took your father's business, the same Hargrove who is trying to take my land. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to frighten you away. You had already suffered enough at that man's hands, but I thought you should know. When you arrive, when we're together, when we can face him together. Hargrove recognized your name when I mentioned I was getting married. When I told him my bride was a Miss Sutton from Boston, he asked questions, too many questions, and I realized he knew. He knew who you were. I think that's why he's escalated his threats. It's not just about the land anymore, it's about you, about finishing what he started in Boston, about making sure the Sutton family has nothing. I don't know why he hates your family, but I promise you this, I won't let him win. We'll fight him together. We'll keep Sweetwater. We'll rebuild your family's name out here where he can't touch it. If I'm gone before you read this, know that I believed in you. Know that I thought you were strong enough to face him without me. Finish what we started, Elalina. Don't let him take this too. Jacob. The letter was dated 3 days before he died. Elalina read it twice, 3 times, trying to understand. Jacob had known about her father, about Hargrove, about everything. And he'd been killed anyway. No, not anyway. Because of it. Hargrove hadn't just wanted the land. He'd wanted to eliminate Jacob, and he'd wanted to make sure Elalina never found out the truth. She stood up, walked to the window, looked out at Sweetwater. This land, this beautiful, brutal land. It wasn't just Jacob's legacy anymore. It was hers too. The last piece of her father's world that Hargrove couldn't take. The last place the Sutton name meant something. She'd told Sheriff Patterson she was staying because she had nowhere else to go, because she needed to prove she could survive. But it was more than that now. This was personal. Emmett Hargrove had destroyed her father, had left her with nothing, and now he thought he could do it again, thought he could pressure her into selling, into running, into disappearing. He was wrong. Elalina gathered up the loan documents, Jacob's letter, all of it, put them in her saddlebag. She needed to show someone, needed to tell someone what she'd found. She rode to the Robertson ranch. Martha was in her kitchen when Elalina arrived, kneading bread dough with strong, practiced hands. She took one look at Elalina's face and wiped her hands on her apron. What happened? Elalina spread the documents on the kitchen table, told Martha everything, about her father's business, about the loan, about Hargrove's role in destroying her family. Martha read through the papers slowly. Her expression darkened with each page. "Son of a bitch," she said finally, which was about as profane as Martha ever got. "He recognized me that day," Elalina said, "when he came to Sweetwater. He asked if we'd met before. He knew who I was. He's known all along." "And he killed Jacob anyway," Martha said, "or had him killed, because Jacob knew the truth." "I can't prove that." "No, but it fits." Martha sat down heavily. "This changes things, Elalina. This isn't just about land anymore. This is about a vendetta, about a man who can't let go." "Why?" Elalina asked. "Why does he hate my family? What did we ever do to him?" Martha shook her head. "Men like Hargrove don't need reasons. They just need excuses. Maybe your father refused him once. Maybe he felt disrespected. Or maybe he just enjoys breaking people who can't fight back. I can fight back. Can you?" Martha's eyes were sharp. "He's got money, power, connections. He's got the Blackwell gang doing his dirty work. What have you got? The truth. Truth doesn't matter much when you're dead." The bluntness of it stung, but Martha was right. Knowing the truth didn't change the balance of power. "So what do I do?" Elalina asked. Martha was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up, went to a cabinet, pulled out a bottle of whiskey, poured 2 glasses. She pushed one across the table to Elalina. "First you drink this, then we make a plan." Elalina drank. The whiskey burned going down. She coughed. Martha smiled slightly. "You're learning," the older woman said. "A few months ago you'd have refused. A few months ago I was a different person." "No," Martha said. "You weren't. You were always this person. You just didn't know it yet." She sat back down, studied Elalina across the table. "Here's what I think. Hargrove knows who you are, knows you have reason to hate him. That makes you dangerous. He's going to move against you. Soon. Let him try. Don't be stupid. You're not ready to face him head on. You can barely shoot straight, can barely stay on a horse. You need time, training, allies. I have you, William, Daniel. That's a start, but it's not enough. We need evidence, real evidence, something that ties Hargrove to Jacob's death, to the threats, to everything." "How do we get that?" Martha smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "We make him show his hand. We make him so angry, so threatened that he does something stupid, something we can prove. That's dangerous. Living is dangerous. At least this way you're in control." Elalina thought about it, about Jacob's letter, about her father's broken promises, about the life she'd left behind in Boston. She'd come west to escape, to start over, to become someone new. But you couldn't outrun the past. Eventually it caught up. Eventually you had to turn and face it. "Tell me what to do," she said. Martha leaned forward. "First we gather more evidence. We go through land office records, find out if other ranchers have had problems with Hargrove, build a pattern. The land office is in town. Then you go to town. Tomorrow. I'll come with you. What if Hargrove has people watching? Let them watch. We're not doing anything illegal, just researching property claims." Martha paused. "But we'll bring guns, just in case." The next morning, Elalina and Martha rode into Clearwater Creek. It was a bright spring day, warm, beautiful, the kind of day that made you forget winter had ever existed. But Elalina couldn't relax. She kept scanning the street, looking for threats, for Hargrove's men, for danger lurking in every shadow. "You're going to wear yourself out," Martha said. "Save your energy for when you actually need it." They tied their horses outside the land office, a small building that doubled as the surveyor's office and territorial records repository. Inside, a clerk sat behind a desk. Spectacles, thinning hair, the permanent stoop of a man who'd spent too many years bent over ledgers. "Help you ladies?" he asked. Not unfriendly, just tired. "We'd like to see the property records for this county," Elalina said. "Specifically homestead claims filed in the last 5 years." The clerk blinked. "That's a lot of records." "We have time." He shrugged, led them to a back room lined with shelves, pointed to a section. "Homestead claims, organized by year. Help yourself." Martha and Elalina dug in. They found Jacob's original filing. April 1873, 640 acres, legal description, boundary markers, all proper and official. "Now look for Hargrove's claim," Martha said. It took an hour, but they found it, a filing dated June 1873, for land that included Jacob's property, 2 months after Jacob had filed, on the same land. "That's not possible," Elalina said. "You can't file a claim on land that's already claimed." "You can if the surveyor makes a mistake," Martha said, "or if someone bribes the surveyor to make a mistake." They kept searching, found more. 4 other small ranches, all with the same pattern. Original homestead filed, then a few months later a Hargrove filing on overlapping land. In every case, the original homesteader had eventually sold to Hargrove, usually for far less than the land was worth. "He files a fraudulent claim," Martha said slowly, "creates a legal dispute, then pressures the homesteader to sell rather than fight it in court, because court costs money, takes time, and most small ranchers can't afford either." "It's theft," Elalina said. "Legal theft." "Yes, but proving it, that's the trick." They copied down the claim numbers, the dates, the names of the other ranchers who'd been pushed out. Elalina felt a grim satisfaction. This was evidence, real evidence. If they could show a pattern, show that Hargrove had done this repeatedly, show that his entire empire was built on fraud, they could destroy him, the same way he'd destroyed her father. They were leaving the land office when it happened. 2 men stepped out of the alley beside the building. Big men, hard faces, the kind who settled disputes with fists instead of words. "Miss Sutton," one of them said. "Mr. Hargrove would like a word." Martha's hand moved to the rifle slung across her back. "The lady's not interested." "Wasn't asking," the man said. He took a step forward. And that's when Elalina saw the third man, behind them, blocking the street back to their horses. They were surrounded. Elalina's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "If Mr. Hargrove wants to speak with me, he can make an appointment, through proper channels." The first man smiled, no humor in it. "See, that's the thing. Mr. Hargrove doesn't like waiting, and he doesn't like folks poking around in business that ain't theirs." "Public records are everyone's business," Martha said. Her rifle was off her back now, not aimed, but ready. "Now step aside. We're leaving." "Can't let you do that, ma'am. Not until Miss Sutton has her conversation with Mr. Hargrove." The man behind them moved closer, cutting off their retreat. Elalina's mind raced. They were in the middle of town, but the street was empty. Mid-morning on a weekday. Most folks were working. The few who might be around were staying out of sight. Nobody wanted trouble with Hargrove's men. "You touch us, and it's assault," Elalina said. "Sheriff Patterson will—" "Sheriff's out of town," the first man interrupted. "Deputy, too. Some trouble at the mining camp. Won't be back till tomorrow." "Of course. How convenient." Martha shifted her stance. "Last chance, boys. Walk away, or what you'll shoot us in the middle of town." The man laughed. "You ain't that stupid, Mrs. Robertson." He was right. If Martha shot first, they'd be the ones arrested. Even in self-defense, even with Hargrove's men threatening them, a woman shooting a man in town would be hard to defend. The man took another step, reached for Elalina's arm. Martha's rifle came up. "Don't!" The man froze, looked at the rifle, looked at Martha's face, saw something there that made him reconsider. "You won't," he said. But he sounded less certain. "Try me." For a long moment nobody moved. The street was silent except for the wind rustling dust. Then a voice called out from down the street. "Problem here." William Robertson, sitting on his horse, rifle across his saddle, and behind him Daniel Tucker. Also armed. The balance had shifted. 3 against 3. Better odds. The first man stepped back, raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "No problem," he said. "Just having a conversation." "Looked like more than that," William said. He rode closer, kept his rifle visible. "These ladies are leaving now. You're going to let them. Mr. Hargrove won't like this." "Don't much care what Hargrove likes," William said. "Now move." The men moved, slowly, reluctantly. But they moved. Martha and Elalina walked to their horses, mounted. William and Daniel positioned themselves between the women and Hargrove's men. They rode out of town at a trot. Not running. That would show fear. But not dawdling either. Once they were clear of Clearwater Creek, William pulled up beside Elalina. "You all right?" She nodded. Couldn't quite trust her voice yet. "We were in town buying supplies," William said. "Saw Hargrove's men follow you to the land office. Figured it might be trouble." "You figured right," Martha said. "Thank you, William. You too, Daniel." Daniel ducked his head. "Just glad we got there in time." They rode in silence for a while. Elalina's hands were shaking now that the danger had passed, adrenaline draining away, leaving her weak and scared. She'd been so close. If William hadn't shown up, if those men had grabbed her, taken her to Hargrove, she didn't want to think about what might have happened. "What did you find?" William asked. "At the land office. Must have been important for them to make a move like that." Martha explained. The overlapping claims, the pattern of fraud, the evidence they'd uncovered. William's jaw tightened. He's been doing this for years. Everyone knew something was off, but nobody could prove it. "We can prove it now," Elalina said. "If we can get this evidence to the territorial authorities, if we can show the pattern." "That's a big if," Daniel said quietly. "Hargrove's got friends in Cheyenne, in the territorial government. He could make this disappear." "Then we make it public," Elalina said. "We tell the other ranchers, the ones who were forced to sell. We get them to come forward, testify." "Some of them are dead," William said. "Like my father. Others have moved on. Too scared to come back and fight." "We have to try." Martha looked at her. "You know what this means, don't you? You're declaring war on the most powerful man in the territory. He won't stop at threats anymore. He'll come for you. Hard." Elalina thought about her father, about Jacob, about everyone Hargrove had destroyed. "Good," she said. "Let him come. At least then we'll see him coming." They made it back to Sweetwater without further incident, but the attempted kidnapping had shaken everyone. "You can't stay out here alone anymore," Martha said as they unsaddled the horses. "Not until this is settled." "I'm not leaving Sweetwater." "I didn't say leave. I said don't stay alone. Daniel, you still got that bedroll?" "Yes, ma'am." "You're bunking in Miss Sutton's barn until this blows over. William and I will ride patrol. Make sure Hargrove's men don't try anything at night." "I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm telling." Martha's face was set. "Jacob was our friend, our neighbor. We failed him. We're not failing you." Elalina felt her throat tighten. "Thank you." That night Daniel made a bed in the barn. William rode the perimeter until midnight. Then Martha took over until dawn. Elalina tried to sleep. Couldn't. Kept thinking about the men in town, about Hargrove, about how close she'd come to being taken. She got up, loaded Jacob's revolver, practiced drawing it like Daniel had shown her. Quick, smooth, aim, fire. Except she didn't fire, just went through the motions, over and over, until her arm ached. She had to get better, had to be ready, because Martha was right. Hargrove was coming, and next time William might not be there to save her. The plan came together over the next 3 days. They met at the Robertson Ranch. Martha, William, Daniel, and Elalina sat around the kitchen table like they were planning a barn raising instead of a trap for the most dangerous man in Wyoming. "We need to force Hargrove's hand," Martha said. "Make him so angry he does something we can prove, something even his friends in Cheyenne can't ignore." "How?" Elalina asked. "We spread a rumor," William said. "Something that threatens him, makes him feel like he's losing control." "What kind of rumor?" Daniel leaned forward. "What if folks heard that Miss Sutton received a big inheritance from back east? Enough money to expand Sweetwater, to hire lawyers, to fight Hargrove in court and win?" Martha nodded slowly. "He'd panic. Can't afford to have someone with resources challenging his fraudulent claims. Can't afford to have his whole empire questioned." "But I don't have an inheritance," Elalina said. "Doesn't matter. Just needs to seem real long enough for him to act." "Act how?" "He'll send Blackwell," William said. "Or come himself. Make threats. Try to intimidate you into selling before you can use this imaginary money against him." "And when he does, we'll have witnesses," Martha finished. "Sheriff Patterson, his deputies, hidden, ready to arrest him for whatever crime he commits." It was risky. Elalina would be bait, exposed, vulnerable. But it might work. "Patterson won't like it," she said. "Patterson wants Hargrove as much as we do," Martha said. "He just needs probable cause. This gives it to him." They worked out the details. Elalina would go to town, make a big show of depositing money at the bank, mention loudly that her uncle in Boston had died, left her a fortune. She was using it to expand the ranch. Mrs. Halloway at the Mercantile would hear, would spread it to everyone. Within a day, Hargrove would know. Then they'd wait. At Sweetwater, with Patterson and his men hidden, ready. "What if Blackwell shoots first?" Elalina asked. "What if he doesn't bother with threats?" "Then Patterson shoots him," William said flatly. "But Blackwell's not stupid. He'll want to scare you first, make you suffer. Men like him always do." "You'll need to be ready," Daniel added. "When they come. Stay calm. Let them talk. Give Patterson time to get into position. And if something goes wrong," Martha pulled out a shotgun. "Set it on the table. Then you use this. Aim for center mass. Don't hesitate. Don't think. Just shoot." Elalina looked at the shotgun, at the faces around the table. These people who'd become her family in the months since Jacob died. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Risking yourselves for me?" Martha's expression softened slightly. "Because you stayed. When everyone said you'd run, you stayed. That means something out here." "And because Hargrove needs to be stopped," William added. "He's terrorized this valley long enough." "And because Mr. Miller would have wanted us to," Daniel said quietly. "He always said folks need to look out for each other. That's what makes a community." Elalina felt something warm in her chest. Gratitude, affection, belonging. She'd come west alone, desperate, running from everything she'd lost. But she wasn't alone anymore. "All right," she said. "Let's do it." The next day, Elalina rode into Clearwater Creek. carried a small leather case. Inside was $200, everything she had left in the world. She walked into the bank, asked to see the manager, made sure her voice carried. "I'd like to open an account," she said, "and deposit these funds, the first installment from my uncle's estate in Boston." The bank manager, a nervous man named Perkins, looked at the money with wide eyes. "That's quite a sum, Miss Sutton." "The full inheritance is considerably larger," Elalina said, loud enough for the other customers to hear. "I'll be receiving monthly transfers. I intend to expand Sweetwater Ranch significantly." Perkins made notes, asked questions, completed the paperwork. Elalina left the bank, walked directly to the mercantile, made a show of ordering supplies, fencing materials, lumber, enough for major construction. Mrs. Halloway's eyes gleamed with curiosity. "Expanding, are we?" she asked. "Indeed. My late uncle was very generous. I plan to triple my herd, build a proper barn, perhaps hire several ranch hands." My, that is ambitious." Elalina smiled, paid for her order, left knowing the story would be all over town by evening. Sheriff Patterson was waiting at his office. "You're sure about this?" he asked. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." Patterson sighed. "All right, I'll bring 3 deputies. We'll position ourselves around your property tomorrow evening. Stay inside after dark. When they come, and they will come, don't do anything stupid." Define stupid. "Anything that gets you killed." "I'll do my best." Elalina rode back to Sweetwater as the sun set. The prairie was beautiful in the golden light. Peaceful. She tried to memorize it, just in case something went wrong. At the ranch, Martha and William were waiting. "It's done," Elalina said. "Now we wait." That night she couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, just sat on the porch with Jacob's revolver in her lap, watching the darkness, waiting for dawn. Daniel joined her around midnight. "Can I tell you something, Miss Sutton?" he asked. "Of course." He was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Miller used to say that fear was just your body getting ready, not to run, but to fight. Sounds like Jacob. He'd be proud of you, what you're doing, standing up to Hargrove. Or he'd think I was crazy." Daniel smiled slightly. "Maybe both." They sat in silence, listening to the night, the wind, the creek, the sounds of Wyoming. Tomorrow everything would change, one way or another. Hargrove would come, and Elalina would be ready, or she'd be dead. Either way, the waiting would be over. She touched the revolver. Cold metal, heavy, real. She'd killed wolves with William's gun, had seen death up close. But this was different. This would be a man, maybe several men, and it would be her or them. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Good," Daniel said. "Means you're smart. Only fools aren't scared." "What if I freeze? What if I can't pull the trigger when it matters?" Daniel looked at her. "You won't. I've seen you. You don't freeze. You act. It's who you are." Elalina hoped he was right, because tomorrow she'd find out. Tomorrow the trap would be set, and whatever came next would determine not just her fate, but the fate of Sweetwater, and everyone who'd stood beside her. The frontier tested everyone Jacob had written, but it rewarded those who stayed. Well, Elalina Sutton had stayed. Now she'd see what reward the frontier had in store. They came at dawn, 6 riders appearing out of the morning mist like ghosts, moving slow, deliberate, the kind of slow that said they knew they had all the time in the world. Elalina saw them from the cabin window. Her mouth went dry. 5 men she didn't recognize, hard faces, gun belts worn low, the kind of men who made their living with violence. And at the center, Frank Blackwell himself. Tall, dark beard, long duster coat that moved like a shadow around him. Even from a distance she could feel the danger radiating off him like heat. Behind him rode Emmett Hargrove. Elalina's breath caught. She hadn't expected Hargrove to come himself, hadn't expected him to risk being seen, being connected directly to whatever was about to happen. But there he was. Expensive clothes, silver hair catching the early light, riding beside a known outlaw like they were business partners, which she supposed they were. She checked her revolver. Loaded. She'd practiced for 3 days straight. Quick draw. Aim, breathe, squeeze. Daniel had made her do it until her arm ached, until she could draw without thinking, until the gun felt like part of her hand. She hoped it would be enough. Outside, hidden in the barn, Sheriff Patterson waited with 2 deputies. William was positioned in the cottonwoods by the creek. Martha had the high ground on the ridge north of the cabin. Daniel was in the root cellar with a clear line of sight to the yard. All armed, all ready, but 6 against 6. And Elalina was the only one exposed, standing in the open, bait in a trap that might not spring. She took a deep breath, stepped out onto the porch. The riders pulled up 20 yards from the cabin, far enough to talk, close enough to shoot if they wanted. Blackwell dismounted first, moved like a predator, all coiled muscle and controlled violence. "Miss Sutton," he called out, "fine morning, isn't it? State your business, Mr. Blackwell." He smiled. No warmth in it. "Heard you came into some money. Inheritance from back east. Congratulations." "Thank you. Thing is, that makes things complicated. See Mr. Hargrove here, he's been trying to help you, offering to buy this property so you don't have to struggle. But now with all this money you might get ideas, might think you can fight him." Elalina said nothing, just waited. Hargrove urged his horse forward, looked down at her from the saddle. "Miss Sutton, I'm going to be frank. You've stumbled into something you don't understand. This valley, this land, it all has a certain order. I maintain that order, and you're disrupting it. By refusing to sell." "By existing," Hargrove said flatly. "You're a reminder of things I'd rather forget. Your father, his failures, the unpleasantness in Boston." There it was, the admission, the connection. "You destroyed my father's business," Elalina said, keeping her voice steady. "Left my family with nothing." "Your father destroyed himself," Hargrove corrected. "He borrowed beyond his means, refused to face reality. I simply collected what was owed." "And now you're doing the same thing here. Fraudulent land claims, threats, murder." Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "Careful with accusations you can't prove." "I can prove the land fraud. I have the documents." "Documents can disappear. So can people." Blackwell moved closer to the porch. His hand rested on his gun belt. "Here's what's going to happen, Miss Sutton. You're going to sign over Sweetwater Ranch to Mr. Hargrove. Today. Right now. For a very generous price. $3,000. And if I refuse, then accidents happen. Just like they happened to Jacob Miller." The casual admission, spoken like he was discussing the weather. "You killed Jacob," Elalina said. "3 men," Blackwell corrected. "Clean work, 1 volley. They never knew what hit them." He said it with pride, like he was describing a skilled craft. "You're confessing to murder. I'm stating facts. What you do with those facts doesn't matter, because after today you won't be around to tell anyone." Hargrove held up a hand. "That's not necessary, Frank. Miss Sutton is going to be reasonable, aren't you?" He leaned forward in his saddle. "You really think this inheritance story is going to save you? You think I don't know it's a lie, I made inquiries. You have no uncle, no inheritance. Just desperate bluffing." "Maybe," Elalina said, "but I do have evidence of your fraudulent land claims, and I do have witnesses who've heard you and Blackwell confess to murder." Hargrove went very still. "What witnesses?" "The ones surrounding us right now." Sheriff Patterson stepped out of the barn, rifle raised. "Emmett Hargrove, Frank Blackwell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and fraud." The 2 deputies emerged from cover. William showed himself at the creek. Martha on the ridge. Blackwell's men reached for their guns. "Don't," Patterson said. "You're surrounded. This can end peacefully or it can end bloody. Your choice." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Blackwell laughed, a cold, ugly sound. "You think you can arrest me, Sheriff? You think that badge means anything out here?" His hand moved toward his gun. Everything happened at once. William fired a warning shot. Blackwell's men drew their weapons. The deputies opened fire. Elalina dropped behind the porch railing as bullets tore through the air above her. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Gunfire cracked like thunder. She heard glass breaking, wood splintering, the sharp crack of rifles and the deeper boom of shotguns. Then a voice. Hargrove. Panicked. "Stop! Stop shooting!" The gunfire slowed. Stopped. Elalina risked a look over the railing. 2 of Blackwell's men were down, one clearly dead, the other bleeding from his shoulder. The rest had their hands up. But Blackwell himself had disappeared. She scanned the yard, saw him moving toward the barn, grabbed someone, used them as a shield. "Daniel." The young ranch hand had come out of the root cellar during the fight. Now Blackwell had him, gun pressed to his temple. "Everyone drop your weapons," Blackwell shouted, "or the boy dies." Patterson hesitated. The deputies looked to him for guidance. "Do it." Blackwell pressed the gun harder against Daniel's head. "Now." Slowly Patterson lowered his rifle, set it down. The deputies did the same. Blackwell backed toward the horses, dragging Daniel with him. "I'm riding out of here," he said. "Anyone tries to stop me, the boy gets a bullet. Understood?" No one moved. Elalina's mind raced. If Blackwell escaped, they'd never get another chance. He'd come back, kill them all, burn Sweetwater to the ground. She looked at the cabin window, the one that faced the barn. If she could get inside, get an angle. She moved, quiet as she could, slipped through the door. Inside, she grabbed Jacob's rifle from beside the bed, moved to the window, opened it carefully. There. Blackwell's back, partially exposed as he focused on the men in front of him. She'd have one shot. Maybe. Daniel's eyes found hers through the window. He saw the rifle, understood what she was planning, and he gave the tiniest nod. Elalina raised the rifle, settled it against her shoulder, found Blackwell in her sights. She thought of her father, of Jacob, of everyone this man had destroyed, breathed out, squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked. The sound was deafening in the small cabin. Through the window she saw Blackwell jerk, saw the surprise on his face, saw him fall. Daniel scrambled away. Patterson and his men rushed forward. Elalina lowered the rifle. Her hands were shaking, her ears ringing. She'd just killed a man. She walked outside on numb legs. The yard was chaos. Deputies securing the surviving outlaws, Martha running down from the ridge, William emerging from the trees, and there in the dust, Frank Blackwell, not moving, blood spreading beneath him, dead. Elalina stared at him, tried to feel something, triumph, relief, anything, but all she felt was empty. Patterson appeared beside her. "Clean shot. Saved the boy's life. Saved all our lives, probably." She nodded. Couldn't speak. "Miss Sutton, Elalina. You all right?" "I killed him," she heard herself say. "You did, and the law will call it justifiable. You saved a hostage, stopped a murderer. You did what had to be done." What had to be done? She'd come west to build a life, to become someone new, and now she was someone who'd killed a man. Daniel appeared, his face pale but his eyes grateful. "Thank you, Miss Sutton. He would have—" "Thank you." Hargrove was being hauled to his feet by the deputies, hands bound, his expensive coat dirty, his face a mask of rage. "You can't prove anything," he snarled. "My lawyers will have me out by tomorrow." "We have 6 witnesses who heard you confess to conspiracy to murder," Patterson said, "and Frank Blackwell's testimony before he died. Blackwell's testimony, he's dead. But his words aren't. We all heard him, heard you. That's enough for a territorial judge." Hargrove's face went white. He'd made a mistake. Come in person, confessed in front of witnesses, thought his power would protect him. But power meant nothing when you were stupid enough to admit to murder. As the deputies loaded Hargrove into a wagon, Elalina sat down on the porch steps. Her whole body was shaking now. Martha sat beside her. Didn't say anything. Just sat there, a solid, warm presence. "I can still see his face," Elalina whispered. "When the bullet hit, the surprise." "You will for a while," Martha said. "Maybe forever. That's the cost. Was it worth it? That's not for me to say. Only you can answer that." Elalina looked out at Sweetwater, at the land she'd fought for, the land that had cost Jacob his life, that had nearly cost hers. Was it worth it? She didn't know. Not yet. The trial was set for 3 weeks later in Cheyenne. Territorial prosecutors came, took statements, built their case against Hargrove. Elalina was cleared of any wrongdoing in Blackwell's death. Self-defense, defense of another, justifiable homicide. The words were clinical, cold. They didn't capture what it felt like to take a life. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Blackwell falling, heard the sound of the gunshot, felt the rifle kick against her shoulder. Martha stayed with her those first few nights, made her eat, made her drink water, sat with her through the nightmares. "It gets better," Martha promised. "Not easy, but better." Elalina wanted to believe her. The testimony at trial was straightforward. 6 witnesses all telling the same story. Hargrove's confession, Blackwell's admission, the attempted murder, the fraudulent land claims. Hargrove's lawyers tried to discredit the witnesses, called them biased, said Elalina had manufactured the inheritance story to trap an innocent man. But the evidence was overwhelming. The pattern of fraud, the threats, the public confession. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty. On all counts. Hargrove was sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. His properties were seized. The fraudulent land claims were voided. 4 families got their ranches back. Sweetwater Ranch was officially registered to Elalina Sutton, sole proprietor. She should have felt victorious, should have felt justified. Instead, she just felt tired. 2 years later. The morning was cool and clear. Elalina stood on her porch watching the sun rise over Sweetwater Creek. The land had changed in 2 years. New barn, expanded herd, a vegetable garden that supplied half of Clearwater Creek. She'd changed too. Her hands were rough, her face weathered by sun and wind. She wore trousers more often than dresses, could outshoot most of the men in the county. Daniel still worked for her, had become her foreman, a steady, loyal presence. The Robertson Ranch had prospered too. Martha and William had expanded, formed a partnership with Sweetwater, shared grazing rights, shared resources. The valley was thriving. Without Hargrove's shadow, small ranches could breathe, could grow. Elalina should have been happy. But there was still something missing, some piece of herself she'd lost in the gunfight, in the aftermath. In the long nights when she couldn't sleep, she heard hoofbeats, turned to see William riding up. He came by most mornings now, sometimes with ranch business, sometimes just to talk. "Morning," he said, dismounted, joined her on the porch. "Morning." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the light spread across the prairie. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," William said finally. Elalina's heart skipped. She knew what was coming, had known for months. "The partnership between our ranches has worked well," he continued. "Really well. And I was thinking, maybe we could extend that partnership, make it permanent. William, I'm not asking you to give up Sweetwater or your independence. I'm asking you to share it, share your life, if you want." Elalina looked at him. This good, steady man who'd saved her life, who'd stood beside her through everything, who'd never once tried to change her or control her. "I need time," she said, "to think about it." "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." After he left, Elalina walked to the small cemetery on the hill. 2 graves there now, Jacob Miller, and beside him a marker for her father. She'd had it made, brought his memory west. She sat beside Jacob's headstone, traced the letters with her finger. "I kept your promise," she said. "Became someone new, someone strong enough for this land." She pulled off the simple gold band she still wore, the one she'd bought in Omaha, had worn for 2 years as a promise to a dead man. "But I think it's time to let go. Time to choose my own future. Not the one we planned, not the one you promised. Mine." She set the ring on the headstone, felt the weight of it lift. "Thank you, Jacob, for bringing me here, for believing I could do this. But I'm done living for ghosts." She stood, looked out at Sweetwater, at the land she'd earned, the legacy she'd built. Then she walked back down the hill, toward the living, toward tomorrow, toward whatever came next. Epilogue. They still tell stories about Elalina Sutton in that part of Wyoming. The mail-order bride who became a legend, the Boston school teacher who brought down Emmett Hargrove, the woman who wouldn't quit. Some say she married William Robertson the next spring, joined the 2 ranches into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Some say she stayed alone, independent to the end. Truth is, it doesn't matter which story you believe. What matters is what she proved, that a woman could claim her own land, fight her own battles, build her own legacy. Sweetwater Ranch thrived for 40 years. When Elalina died in 1918, the land patent hung above her fireplace. Recorded owner Elalina Sutton. Not Miller, not Robertson. Sutton. Her father had built an empire and lost it. She built something smaller, but it was hers, something that couldn't be taken. The Sutton name meant something in Wyoming territory. It meant strength, survival. A woman who became exactly who she chose to be. That's the kind of legacy worth leaving. That's the inheritance that lasts. And that's how a legend is born.